He missed the most precious moment of his life, the birth of his own child, because he was too busy showering gifts on his secret lover. Now, a single betrayal ignites a spark that threatens to burn down an empire. The child born into a powerful family suddenly bears an uncertain future as bitterness and hidden agendas swirl. How could he let a moment of selfish desire overshadow a sacred promise? As the baby's name is struck from its own father's inheritance, deceit runs rampant, and family bonds are tested to the limit. Brace yourself for a roller coaster of revelations, regrets, and revenge. Daniel Clark was not merely wealthy. He was the kind of millionaire whose name, once murmured at a dinner party, would command the entire room's attention. His real estate developments spanned from Beverly Hills to Manhattan, forging a reputation for success so colossal it seemed invincible. Yet no kingdom stands forever, and cracks in Daniel's grand fortress were about to be laid bare. Married to Rachel Mitchell Clark, the only daughter of business mogul Thomas Mitchell, Daniel enjoyed near unlimited access to power, money, and influence. Thomas Mitchell was a Wall Street legend who had taken a fatherly liking to Daniel when he first met him as Rachel's fiancé. Perhaps Thomas saw a bit of his younger self in Daniel, charismatic, fearless, always reaching for bigger deals. Over time, though, Thomas began to sense something off about his son-in-law, something hidden beneath that charming smile, a restlessness that refused to be tamed. Rachel was a striking woman, dark hair that cascaded gracefully down her back, hazel eyes that flickered with fiery determination, and an intelligence that could outmaneuver most men in any boardroom. She was used to winning debates, commanding respect, and following her instincts. When she decided Daniel was the one, she never looked back. Their wedding was the event of the season, with paparazzi lurking outside the exclusive Hotel Bel Air, hoping for a snapshot of the newlywed mogul couple. Hollywood stars mingled with business magnates. For a while, their marriage was the talk of the town, two powerhouses forging a future that seemed unstoppable. But as the months stretched into years, Daniel's ambition soared higher, and so did the demands on his time. He was always chasing the next venture, the next big investment, the next sheer chunk of land that could earn him another fortune. Rachel, who had grown up in a world of high standards and relentless competition, understood the drive. Yet she yearned for more than financial successes. She wanted a stable family, children, and a husband who could share her joys and burdens. His unwavering gaze on his cell phone, even during their most intimate dinners, became a silent wedge driven between them. What Rachel did not know, at least not at first, was the reason Daniel's attention seemed even further divided of late Fiona Grayson. Fiona was a marketing executive at a top firm in Los Angeles, smart, strikingly beautiful, and hungry for a taste of the high life. She possessed a certain quality that offered Daniel what he mistakenly believed was freedom. Where Rachel wanted structure and sincerity, Fiona offered impulsiveness and flattery. She laughed at all his jokes, praised his brilliance, and gave him a sense of endless adventure. Their relationship started innocently enough, business dinners under the guise of discussing marketing campaigns. But soon, these meetings turned into stolen weekends away, and flirty texts morphed into something that Daniel rationalized as an escape from the pressures of marriage. Rachel sensed a distance growing, but pregnant with their first child, tried her best to maintain peace. She convinced herself that Daniel was simply anxious about the shift in their lives. After all, fatherhood could intimidate even the most self-assured of men. She vowed to be understanding, to let him navigate his business deals, and to hope that once the baby arrived, Daniel would settle into a new normal. In truth, Daniel's life had become a pendulum swinging between guilt and excitement. He juggled business expansions, fatherly duties in the near future, and the magnetic pull of Fiona. He knew the birth was approaching. He had the date circled in red on his calendar. Yet he had also circled another date, Fiona's birthday, just 2 weeks before the baby's due date. That circle, ironically, was bolder and darker than the one marking the baby's expected arrival. Rachel's pregnancy progressed smoothly, a miracle for which she was grateful. She spent her days organizing a nursery that resembled a fairy tale kingdom, complete with plush chairs and soft lighting. Each detail was chosen with love crib bedding, embroidered with the family crest baby blankets, as soft as the clouds. It became her sanctuary and the physical manifestation of all her hopes for the future. Thomas Mitchell, Rachel's father, was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. Though he was known for his steely demeanor in business dealings, he melted at the mention of his soon-to-arrive grandchild. He even set aside part of his estate in trust, a tradition among the Mitchells, ensuring the new baby would have a financial head start. Thomas put the baby's name down on a partial inheritance list, earmarked to become official as soon as the birth certificate was signed. Yet, unbeknownst to Rachel and Thomas, Daniel's mind was somewhere else, somewhere wrapped in Fiona's alluring whisper. Fiona's birthday approached, and she had dropped countless hints about wanting something special. Daniel was torn. His rational side reminded him that his wife was 9 months pregnant and could deliver any day. The fatherly part of him whispered that this was a one-time event that he should never miss. But another part, a reckless, lustful part, couldn't resist the idea of surprising Fiona with a luxurious trip, especially after she teased that she'd never felt truly spoiled in her entire life. As the day neared, Daniel hatched a plan that teetered on insanity. Fiona's birthday fell on a weekend. Rachel's due date was about 2 weeks away, and the doctor had mentioned it could likely go full term. Daniel convinced himself he could slip away for 48 hours, pamper Fiona in Las Vegas, then return to Los Angeles in time for the birth. He reasoned that he had been overcompensating lately, attending every prenatal appointment, bringing Rachel anything she craved, and stockpiling baby supplies. One weekend of indulgence he thought would be forgiven, or better yet, never known if he played his cards right. He booked a private flight to Vegas, reserved the presidential suite at the Bellagio, and planned a celebration that would make headlines if the press ever caught wind. Diamonds, champagne, and the best dining experiences lined up for Fiona's birthday weekend. Meanwhile, Rachel spent her final days preparing for the baby's arrival, certain Daniel would never leave her side. She noticed him packing a small bag, but assumed he was traveling for business. After all, deals waited for no man. She trusted that he would be back well in time. The morning of Fiona's birthday, Daniel left a quick note on the kitchen counter for Rachel meeting with overseas clients, urgent. I'll be back Monday. Love you, Dee, nothing suspicious in her eyes. She had seen hundreds of these notes over the years, each promising to return from some fleeting trip or meeting. She murmured a prayer for his safety, rubbed her growing belly, and wondered if the baby would decide to come early. In Las Vegas, Fiona lit up like a child at Christmas when she saw the grandeur Daniel had arranged. They sipped champagne as the Bellagio fountains danced in the background. That night, Daniel nearly convinced himself that all was well. The ring of his phone drowned in the roar of the crowd, the nightclubs, and his own ego. He craved Fiona's admiration, that rush of being the man who could make fantasies come true. Little did Daniel know that at home in Los Angeles, Rachel was going into labor unexpectedly, 2 weeks early. Rachel had been browsing baby name books when the first wave of pain hit. Initially, it felt like a mild ache, something she could dismiss. But moments later, a sharper pain clenched her abdomen. Alarmed, she tried calling Daniel. His phone went straight to voicemail. She texted him, no response. Heart pounding, she dialed her father, Thomas Mitchell. Thomas rushed to Rachel's side, calling the doctors and preparing a car for the hospital. Rachel clung to a baby blanket as she was escorted to the maternity ward. She reassured herself. He'll come. He wouldn't miss the birth. Hours passed in agonizing increments. Nurses checked in, doctors monitored her vital signs, and the pains intensified. Yet Daniel was nowhere to be found. Rachel's face, once glowing with anticipation, now reflected fear and heartbreak. Where was her husband? In Las Vegas. Daniel was unreachable, not only because he was indulging in Fiona's birthday party, but because the phone signals on the Strip were overwhelmed by massive weekend crowds. Text after text from Rachel went unanswered. The hospital staff saw the distress in Rachel's eyes, so they offered whatever comfort they could. But no one could substitute for the father who was supposed to be there, hand in hand, sharing each breath of this momentous occasion. Meanwhile, Fiona was enjoying her night to the fullest. She recognized that Daniel's phone was buzzing in his pocket, but she didn't press him about it. A part of her enjoyed the idea that Daniel was choosing her over whatever else was calling for his attention. She didn't suspect it was something as critical as the birth of his child, or maybe she didn't want to know. By the time Daniel finally checked his phone, Rachel had already delivered a healthy baby girl. The messages hit him like a truck. I'm in labor. Where are you, Daniel? Please, I need you. Dozens of missed calls, frantic voicemails, and texts begging him to come. Daniel's face went pale, a cold panic gripping his chest. Fiona watched him scramble as he stammered something incoherent. She saw the horror in his eyes as he realized his entire life was unraveling. In the hospital, Rachel cradled a tiny, perfect infant. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not tears of pure joy, but tears laced with betrayal. Thomas Mitchell, standing nearby, clenched his jaw in anger at Daniel's absence. The nurses whispered, the doctors sighed, and no one knew what explanation to offer Rachel. She drifted into a fitful sleep, clutching her baby, forming a protective shield around her child's innocence. Daniel caught the earliest private flight back to Los Angeles the next morning. The moment he landed, he rushed straight to the hospital. Guilt bore down on him, making each step feel like wading through quicksand. He expected to see Rachel in her room holding the baby, waiting for him to come crawling back with an apology. But what he encountered upon arrival was far more devastating. Rachel's eyes were cold red from weeping. Thomas stood beside her, his towering presence even more intimidating than usual. No words, no excuses could mend that first look Rachel gave him. It was a combination of heartbreak fury and utter disappointment. Daniel stammered an apology, tried to explain an urgent business trip, but the clinical beep of medical monitors punctuated the silence that followed. Rachel knew the truth, an intangible truth that defied all the lies Daniel could muster. She didn't need to see the credit card statements or hear voicemails. She felt his betrayal in the very marrow of her bones. Thomas said nothing, but the glare he offered. Daniel spoke volumes. The baby, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, let out a tiny cry. Rachel turned away, cooing softly to calm her daughter, leaving Daniel to stand alone, acutely aware of the moment he would never reclaim. The next few days at the hospital were a somber ballet of forced politeness. Nurses noted the tension in the room, whenever Daniel tried to approach. Rachel had barely spoken to him, other than curt, monosyllabic responses that betrayed a deep reservoir of resentment. Thomas Mitchell, for his part, hovered protectively, ensuring Daniel had no chance to manipulate or charm his way back into Rachel's good graces. In the corridors, doctors congratulated the family on a healthy delivery, but behind closed doors, chaos simmered. Daniel tried to hold his daughter. He had imagined this moment for months. He had pictured himself smiling tears of joy slipping from his eyes as he cradled the new life he helped create. Instead, he felt like an unwelcome intruder. Rachel only permitted him to touch the baby under the nurse's watchful eyes. Each time he tried to apologize or explain, Rachel stiffened an icy aura that kept him at bay. Finally, on the fourth day, Rachel and the baby were cleared to go home. Typically, this was the moment where father would step in, gather up his newborn and mother, and escort them lovingly into a waiting car. Instead, Thomas took charge. As they exited the hospital, paparazzi lurked from a distance. The press had caught wind that the Mitchell heir had delivered a granddaughter. But Daniel's typical flamboyance in front of the cameras was nowhere to be seen. He trailed behind, forced to watch Rachel slide into the back seat of her father's limousine, baby in her arms, while he stepped into a separate car. Back at the Mitchell mansion, an estate that spanned acres of carefully manicured lawns and boasted marble statues from Italy, Rachel and the baby were ushered into a private wing. The room was decorated lavishly for the baby's arrival. Pink balloons, stuffed animals, and family heirlooms lined the space. The staff stood by with congratulatory smiles, though they too sensed an undercurrent of tension. Daniel tried to enter the nursery, but Thomas blocked him. "Not yet," Thomas said, his voice cool and controlled. "She needs space. We need answers." Daniel swallowed hard. He understood that his father-in-law had enough power to pull every string in his universe if he so desired. This was no idle threat. Thomas could sever Daniel from the fortune, from the business networks, from everything he had worked to build. Now Daniel was faced with the implications of his choices. Missing the birth had lit a fuse under a decades-old family tradition. Rachel's father had always told her that the Mitchell family inheritance was more than money. It symbolized trust, legacy, and shared values. Marrying Daniel Rachel had believed he embodied the same. That faith was now shattered. Thomas had already begun making calls to the family attorney about adjustments to the inheritance trust. He was prepared to remove Daniel's name entirely from the baby's inheritance documents. That meant Daniel would have no authority, no control over the funds set aside for his own child. In the Mitchell world, that was a grave disgrace akin to being disowned. Inside her private suite, Rachel rocked, her baby tears slipping down her cheeks. She replayed the labor in her mind, the fear she felt, the emptiness when Daniel wasn't there. She wanted to believe there was still hope, that love could triumph. But each time she glanced at her phone, remembering how she begged him to show up, a fresh wave of anger crushed that hope. She told herself, he chose someone else's birthday over the birth of his child. He chose a weekend of pleasure over our family. It didn't take long for the confrontation to take place. That evening, Daniel stood before Thomas and Rachel in a stately study lined with leather-bound books. Dark paneling on the walls seemed to close in on him like a menacing shadow. On a table was a sheet of legal documentation that designated the baby's inheritance, and now a new version lay next to it, with Daniel's rights as a trustee removed. "I want an explanation," Thomas began, hands clasped behind his back. A real one, not your carefully rehearsed excuses. Daniel tried to regain some composure. I was out of town for business. My flight got delayed. I rushed back as soon as I could. Rachel's voice cracked like a whip. Don't lie to us. Where were you really? You left a note about urgent business, but the hospital called the office. They said they hadn't heard from you. Court Daniel fumbled. It was a private deal I was working on. Something that needed a discreet approach. I didn't want to alarm you with details. That's enough. Thomas interrupted. I hired a private investigator. He opened a folder revealing photographs of Daniel and Fiona in Las Vegas, dining together, kissing in front of a fountain, champagne glasses raised in celebration. Rachel's eyes flitted to the images, her face twisting into a pained expression before she looked away, tears brimming. You think we wouldn't find out? You missed your child's birth for this woman's birthday. Daniel's cheeks burned with shame and panic. He realized how deep of a hole he had dug himself. Rachel didn't scream. She simply stared at him like a stranger. The silence that filled the study was more brutal than any shouting could have been. Take your name off the trust, Thomas said, sliding a pen across the table. The baby's inheritance will not include you. We will not have someone so irresponsible, so unfaithful dictate how my grandchild's future is managed. Daniel stared at the papers. His mind raced. If he signed, he was relinquishing all rights to manage or access the inheritance. It was a colossal humiliation. But if he refused, the threat of losing Rachel completely loomed. Not to mention, Thomas could leverage his connections in the business world to freeze Daniel out of future opportunities. Torn between pride and damage. Control. Daniel's hands trembled. Rachel spoke, her voice firm, yet laced with heartbreak. If you don't sign, you'll regret it. If you do sign, I might give us a chance to talk. But know this, our marriage will never be the same. Daniel, eyes downcast, scribbled his signature. The moment the pen lifted from the page, he felt the weight of 1,000 regrets crashing onto his shoulders. Fiona Grayson had spent the previous days in a whirl of confusion. Daniel had abruptly left Vegas early Sunday morning, face ashen, refusing to divulge details. He muttered something about an emergency. In the days that followed, he ignored her calls. Fiona, not oblivious to the possibility that Daniel was actually married, she had her suspicions, decided to dig for answers. She scrolled through social media, found no direct mention of Daniel's personal life. But a quick internet search revealed who Daniel Clark truly was. A high-flying real estate mogul, famously married to Rachel Mitchell Clark of the Mitchell family fortune. Countless articles praised the power couple. Photos of them at charity galas, dressed to the nines, arms entwined in a display of glamour and affection. Fiona realized she was the other woman in the biggest way possible. At first, a wave of fury washed over her. How dare he? He had lied about having a complicated divorce. Then came guilt. Did I help destroy a marriage? An entire family? She recalled the hush in his voice whenever she asked about Rachel, how he'd deflect or claim it was over. Fiona felt trapped in a moral quandary. The lavish attention Daniel gave her, Tripp's jewelry and the sense of being cherished, was overshadowed now by the realization that he missed his child's birth. What kind of man does that? Her phone vibrated. It was a text from Daniel. We need to talk. A million questions flared inside her. Are you leaving your wife? Do you love me? Or was this a fling? She wasn't sure what the truth was anymore, or if she wanted to hear it. When she finally agreed to meet, it was in a quiet restaurant in downtown Los Angeles. No private jets, no ostentatious displays of wealth. Daniel arrived looking haggard, dark circles under his eyes, the usual confidence nowhere to be found. Fiona barely recognized the man, who once basked in his own glow. Before sitting, Daniel gave a small nod, an apology in his body language, if not in words. They sat at a corner booth, each nursing a coffee that grew cold from neglect. Fiona mustered her courage. "Is it true? You're married and your wife just had a baby?" Daniel exhaled slowly, raking a hand through his hair. "Yes." His eyes flickered with shame. "I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. I never intended for it to happen like this." She almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "Never intended, Daniel, you told me you were separated. That the divorce was almost final." "I thought I could manage it," he said, staring into his coffee cup, unable to meet her gaze. "I was selfish. I never realized it would all collapse so spectacularly." Fiona's voice grew quiet. "You missed your child's birth to celebrate my birthday. I can't wrap my head around that." She paused, letting the statement linger thick with guilt. "I don't want to be known for that, Daniel." He reached out to place a hand over hers, but she pulled back. She noticed the desperation in his eyes. "I've lost a lot," he said. "Rachel kicked me out of the house. I've been staying in a hotel. Her father is making changes to the inheritance. I need to set things right." Fiona shook her head. "I never asked you to do any of this. I can't be the cause of breaking up your family. Whether you want to save your marriage or not, that's on you. But I'm not going to be part of more lies." She stood up, voice resolute. "We're done, Daniel. If you want to talk in the future, I need to see that you're not half in or half out of your marriage. But right now, it seems like you don't even know what you want." She turned to leave, each step echoing the weight of finality. Daniel watched her go, a swirling mix of regret and relief churning inside him. He had indulged in a fantasy that cost him dearly, a fantasy that no longer wanted any part of his chaos. Now he stood at a crossroads, forced to face the consequences of every lie he had told, every vow he had broken. In the weeks that followed, Daniel tried to pick up the shattered pieces of his life. Rachel moved back into the Mitchell estate with their baby girl, whom they had named Lily, while Daniel stayed at a luxury hotel near his office. He spent his days oscillating between heartbreak and denial. Work offered little solace. Rumors spread that he was in the midst of a scandal. Associates whispered about a mistress and a missed birth, each retelling tinged with judgment. Thomas Mitchell remained stone-faced in all business dealings with Daniel. He refused to speak about anything other than official matters, and even then it was strictly minimal. At one point, an urgent land deal came up that required both men's signatures. They sat across the conference room table, lawyers present. Daniel tried to engage Thomas in conversation, to express remorse or negotiate some personal truce, but Thomas's curt nods and cold stares said it all. Rachel kept contact with Daniel, limited to text messages about Lily's well-being, medical checkups, scheduling visits, nothing more. In their marriage, an emotional chasm had formed, one that threatened to be unbridgeable. During a supervised visit at the estate, Daniel held Lily in his arms for the first time. A surge of paternal love coursed through him, followed swiftly by guilt. He saw the infant's delicate features, the soft tuft of hair, the tiny fingers curled around his thumb. He realized too late that no mistress's birthday could ever measure up to this moment. He had robbed himself of being present at her birth, and the regret weighed on him like an anchor. In the background, the legal drama unfurled. Thomas's attorneys updated the trust paperwork, making sure Daniel had zero oversight on Lily's funds. By Mitchell family rules, the father would traditionally be named co-trustee until the child came of age. Now that role rested solely with Rachel and Thomas. Even the line that read, "Daniel Clark, father," was unceremoniously struck from the documents. It was not that Lily would be disinherited. That was never an option for Thomas. But Daniel would have no say in how or when the funds were used. It was a profound statement of distrust. Adding insult to injury, Rachel filed paperwork to potentially separate from Daniel. She wasn't ready for a full divorce, but she wanted legal protection in case he tried to claim anything from Lily's trust or the estate. A restraining order was not necessary, but she insisted on a legal separation agreement that detailed his limited rights within the family. The message was clear. He might be Lily's father by blood, but any involvement in her financial or personal decisions would be entirely at Rachel's discretion. When Daniel first received the papers at his hotel, he felt his stomach twist. He had always believed he would be at the helm of his child's future, guiding her, protecting her. Now he stood outside that circle of trust, shut out by his own reckless choices. Shame gnawed at him, fueled by the knowledge that no one was to blame but himself. Meanwhile, Fiona tried to distance herself from the whirlwind of scandal. She tendered her resignation at her marketing firm, citing personal reasons, and moved to a smaller apartment on the other side of town. The calls from reporters came in waves. Some had discovered her identity. She refused to speak to the press, refusing to become another footnote in the tabloid saga. She had learned a brutal lesson. Illusions of romance with a married millionaire carried a steep cost. For Daniel, every day was a lesson in humility. He had been the epitome of confidence and success, only to find himself reduced to an outcast in his own family. Yet a part of him refused to give up on redemption. He vowed to prove that he could change, that he could be the father Lily deserved. Whether Rachel would ever trust him again was another question altogether. Months passed, and Lily grew into a bright-eyed infant with a charming smile. Rachel devoted her life to caring for her daughter, determined to shield her from the drama that had consumed her parents. Thomas funded a top-tier nanny and a private security detail, just in case paparazzi got too close. The Mitchell name was precious, and the family guarded Lily's privacy fiercely. During this period, Daniel embarked on a personal journey. Guilt turned into motivation. He wanted to atone, to show that he could be a better man. He put aside his more ostentatious habits and invested time in therapy, seeking to understand why he had risked everything for a fleeting affair. He acknowledged his flaws, the craving for admiration, the inability to handle marriage pressures, and the arrogance that came from unrestrained success. Though Rachel had severed most personal ties, she allowed Daniel scheduled visitation with Lily. During these visits, he was accompanied by a nanny, or sometimes by Rachel herself, if she felt comfortable. Slowly, the ice began to thaw, at least in terms of co-parenting. They might not have been close, but they were learning to coexist for Lily's sake. One afternoon, Daniel arrived at the estate for a supervised visit. He had just completed a group therapy session where he discussed the complexities of forgiveness, both self-forgiveness and earning it from others. Carrying a small bag of baby toys, he entered the grand foyer, feeling a mixture of awe and remorse for what he once called home. A staff member directed him to the nursery, where Lily was awake cooing at a mobile of hanging stars. Rachel was there, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing a simple cardigan rather than her usual designer attire. She looked tired, but content, motherhood giving her a soft glow. Daniel knelt beside Lily's crib. The baby flashed a gummy smile, instantly melting his heart. "Hey, little one," he whispered, offering her a plush toy. Lily reached out, grabbing Daniel's finger. An electric jolt of paternal love coursed through him. It struck Daniel that Lily was the purest reflection of what he and Rachel had once shared, a love that was genuine before it got twisted by ambition and betrayal. Rachel observed them for a moment, her expression unreadable. "She's been doing well," she said softly, starting to try to roll over. "The doctor says she's healthy and on track." Daniel nodded. "That's good. Really good." He hesitated, his next words carefully chosen. I'm making changes, Rachel. I've been going to therapy. I've been trying to." Rachel held up a hand. "I don't want excuses, Daniel. If you're changing, let your actions speak for you." "I understand," he said, breath catching in his throat. "I'm not expecting anything from you. I know trust isn't something you can just rebuild overnight." She stared at him, her gaze softening slightly. "I appreciate that. And for Lily's sake, I do hope you keep going on this path. But don't confuse that with us reconciling. You need to earn that trust every day, if it's even possible to earn it back at all." Despite the cold reality of her words, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Rachel's bitterness had tempered. She still hurt, still felt betrayed, but she was no longer determined to freeze him out completely. In that tiny flicker of warmth, Daniel found his resolve to become the father Lily needed, and perhaps, someday, the husband Rachel once loved. Not all attempts at redemption happen in a vacuum. As Daniel took small steps to repair his relationship with Lily, and in the distant realm of possibility, with Rachel, Fiona re-emerged. Several months of silence had made Daniel think she had moved on entirely, but that assumption shattered when he saw an email from her in his inbox. Its subject line read, "Need to talk urgent." A flurry of emotions stormed through him: fear, guilt, curiosity. He knew he owed Fiona an apology for dragging her into his mess, but the urgency of her tone unsettled him. He replied, and they agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near downtown. As soon as Fiona walked in, Daniel noticed changes. She looked thinner, her eyes carrying the weight of worry. The confident glow she once exuded was replaced by tension. He stood to greet her, but she offered a quick nod, skipping pleasantries. They sat across from each other, steam rising from untouched cups of tea. Fiona spoke first. "I'm not here to rekindle anything," she began. "Let's get that straight. But you need to know, there are some rumors circulating in my old firm about a potential lawsuit, something about hush money. I wanted you to hear it from me." Daniel frowned, confusion evident. "Hush money? What does that have to do with me?" She sighed. "Remember how you used the company's resources to plan my birthday trip? You asked me to book certain things under a marketing budget. The rumor is that your father-in-law, Thomas Mitchell, discovered the paper trail. My former boss told me the Mitchell family might be building a case to show you misused funds and possibly defrauded Mitchell Enterprises since you had some shared ventures with them." Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew that some of the business deals he had orchestrated overlapped with Mitchell's finances. If Thomas had discovered that Daniel used company funds for personal affairs, it could be used against him in court. Potentially, it could lead to criminal charges, or at the very least, civil suits that would wipe out his assets. He rubbed his temples, tension pounding behind his eyes. "I wasn't thinking clearly back then. I never thought Thomas would dig that deep. If there's a lawsuit, it's not just about me. It could damage the entire enterprise." Fiona shrugged, sympathy flickering in her gaze. That's not my concern anymore, Daniel. I wanted you to know before you get blindsided. I've moved on from the firm, but the rumors are swirling. And if I'm subpoenaed, I have to tell the truth. The wave of panic in Daniel's chest expanded. He imagined the humiliation of a public lawsuit, the final blow to his already fractured reputation. He also knew how relentless Thomas Mitchell could be when he set his mind on revenge. There was only one solution he could think of to come clean to Rachel and Thomas fully before they made a move. Better to face the storm than wait to be struck by lightning. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I appreciate you warning me." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to ask, How are you otherwise?" She gave a short laugh, tinged with sadness. "You mean after learning I was the other woman who helped ruin a marriage?" "I'm coping, working freelance, trying to rebuild my life. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for everything that happened." He nodded, shame burning his cheeks. "I am too," he whispered. "I hope you find peace." They parted ways, the past swirling between them like a ghost. Daniel left the cafe mind racing. He recalled how he had tried to bury evidence of the Vegas trip under marketing expenses and client entertainment accounts. At the time, it seemed like a small, inconsequential thing, a perk of being at the top. But now, those small deceptions threatened to unravel the fragile stability he was fighting to keep. Daniel had a choice to make: confront Thomas, or wait to be devoured by the man's wrath. After all, he still had a chance. No one knew how far Thomas had gone, or if the rumors were just that rumors. But given Thomas's clear distrust, Daniel guessed that the older man would not let a single misdeed slide. That night, Daniel stared out of the window of his hotel suite. The city lights glittered, mocking him with their distant shimmer. He picked up his phone, drafting a text to Rachel. "We need to talk. This is urgent. Please meet me tomorrow. I'll bring the documentation." A bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he hit send. Whether or not she agreed, Daniel planned to march into the Mitchell estate the next day. He was done running from consequences. Much to Daniel's surprise, Rachel responded to his text. She agreed to a meeting on the condition that it would happen at Thomas's office in downtown LA, rather than at the family estate. Daniel arrived early, armed with a folder of financial records, bank statements, and emails, anything to prove he wanted to come clean. Rachel showed up minutes later, Lily in a baby carrier, and Thomas in tow. The tension was palpable. Thomas's office was an architectural marvel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, abstract artwork that hinted at his refined taste, and a monstrous desk that seemed to dominate the room. Thomas sat behind it, fingers steepled. Rachel sat to one side, cradling Lily, while Daniel took a seat across from Thomas. "Let's make this quick," Thomas said, his voice resonating with controlled impatience. Daniel cleared his throat. "I've heard rumors that you might be investigating misused funds. I want to lay everything on the table." He handed over the folder, struggling to maintain eye contact with Thomas. "Yes, I used company accounts for personal expenses during the Vegas trip. I also moved money between several marketing budgets to hide it. I'm not proud. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right, repay the fund's penalties, whatever." Thomas flipped through the documents, his expression unreadable. Rachel's gaze darted between them, concern etched on her face. Lily fussed in her carrier, adding a soft undercurrent of baby cries to the charged atmosphere. After a few moments, Thomas closed the folder. "I appreciate your honesty, though it's months late. The question is, why should I believe you now?" Daniel swallowed. Because I don't want to drag this out any longer. I'm trying to be a better man for Lily's sake. I know I've lost your trust and likely Rachel's, but I'm done running or hiding from my mistakes. Thomas leaned back in his chair. If this were strictly business, I'd have you prosecuted. But you're still the father of my granddaughter. For that reason alone, I'm considering an alternative. Rachel spoke up for the first time. What alternative? Thomas tapped a pen on the desk. Daniel signs an agreement. He repays the misused funds with interest, relinquishes any stake in future Mitchell-Clark ventures, and acknowledges that any breach will lead to immediate legal action. In short, you remain Lily's father, but you're cut off from any direct business involvement. Effectively, you become an outsider in everything but name. A wave of relief and sorrow hit Daniel simultaneously. Relief that he might avoid jail time or a crippling lawsuit. Sorrow at the realization he'd be ostracized from the empire he helped build. He glanced at Rachel, hoping for a sign of empathy. Her face was stoic, but he noticed the tight grip of her hand around Lily's carrier handle, the subtle trembling of her lips. "I'll do it," Daniel said at last, voice trembling. "I'll sign whatever you need. I just want a chance to stay involved in Lily's life." A flicker of surprise crossed Thomas's face, as though he hadn't expected Daniel's compliance so readily. "Then so be it. I'll have the paperwork drawn up." He moved his gaze to Rachel. "That leaves us with the question of your marriage." Silence descended. Rachel took a deep breath, her eyes damp. "I need time," she whispered. "This is all too much. But I won't keep Lily from her father if he's genuinely trying." In that moment, Lily let out a tiny wail, as if expressing her own discomfort at the tense environment. Rachel lifted her, gently cooing to calm her. Daniel's eyes filled with tears he fought to contain. Here they all were, battling over the aftermath of his betrayal, while their innocent child was caught in the middle. Thomas lifted a brow. "We'll give you time, Rachel. But make no mistake, if Daniel steps out of line again, I'll unleash every legal hound at my disposal." "Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Daniel murmured. He felt hollow. Even though he had avoided the worst legal repercussions, he realized how fragile his standing was, how he teetered on the edge of total ruin. A month later, Daniel finalized the agreement that severed his official ties to the Mitchell Empire. He repaid the misappropriated funds, draining much of his personal savings. Though financially bruised, he was not bankrupt, maintaining a modest portfolio of independent real estate ventures. His penthouse living was traded for a more subdued condo, where he lived alone, away from the glare of paparazzi. Every other weekend, Daniel visited Lily at the Mitchell estate, or sometimes took her to the park under Rachel's cautious supervision. He cherished those visits, learning how to be present, how to feed her a bottle burp her gently, and rock her to sleep. Each giggle or gurgle Lily made carved deeper into his heart, reinforcing his determination to never abandon her again. Meanwhile, Rachel wrestled with her conflicting emotions. She still felt a persistent ache whenever she thought about the hospital room waiting for Daniel in vain. Yet, seeing him with Lily brought pangs of the old affection she once felt. She observed how Daniel's eyes sparkled when Lily cooed how gentle he was when he read her bedtime stories. The man who had once been absent was now consistently present, but trust was like a shattered mirror. Even if pieced together, the cracks remained visible. Thomas maintained a watchful distance. He allowed Daniel access to Lily, but refrained from personal interaction. He made it clear he was only doing this for his granddaughter's well-being. Any illusions Daniel might have harbored about earning back Thomas's respect were quickly dispelled by the older man's stony demeanor. One afternoon, Rachel found herself alone with Daniel Lilly napping in her crib. They sat in the living room, the silence thick. Eventually, Rachel spoke, her eyes fixed on a family portrait taken at their wedding. "Did you ever love me, Daniel? Or was it just convenience marrying the Mitchell heiress?" He met her gaze, pain etched across his features. "I loved you, Rachel. I swear I did. Part of me still does. But I got lost, caught up in ambition, success, the temptation of feeling wanted elsewhere. I was an idiot." She looked away, tears brimming. "I've been replaying everything in my mind. The times you came home late, the business trips you said you had to take. I can't help but wonder how many of them were really with her." Daniel's throat tightened. "Not all, I promise. But some, yes. I'm not going to lie anymore." Her voice trembled. "It hurts more than you'll ever know." He reached out tentatively, covering her hand with his. "I understand if you can't forgive me, if you never want to be with me again. But I'm here, for Lily, and if there's ever a chance, I'm here to make things right." Rachel swallowed hard, letting his hand remain for a moment before pulling away. "I don't know if I can trust you, but I can see you're trying. Let's just take it one day at a time." It wasn't a declaration of love or reconciliation, but it was a small opening, a glimmer of possibility amidst the rubble of their marriage. Neither dared hope for a miracle, but sometimes miracles are not single grand events. They're slow awakenings of compassion and understanding. The path to healing was not smooth. On occasion, old habits threatened to resurface. Daniel found himself tempted by social invitations with high-profile clients reminiscent of his former lifestyle. But each time he remembered Lily's face, the heartbreak in Rachel's eyes, and the vow he made in therapy to value what truly mattered over empty thrills. Rachel too grappled with her own vulnerabilities. She was no stranger to heartbreak. She had seen it happen to friends in her social circle. But she never expected to be the wife scorned, the mother left alone in the hospital. Therapy became her compass, guiding her through the tangled forest of anger, betrayal, and lingering love. Thomas, though still guarded, noticed the incremental changes. He could see Daniel was no longer showing off extravagant purchases or partying away. Instead, Daniel was meticulously reorganizing his smaller real estate ventures, building them ethically step by step. On a business trip to New York, Thomas glanced over a newspaper article highlighting Daniel's philanthropic contributions to affordable housing. It was a small piece, overshadowed by bigger headlines, but it caught Thomas's attention. Perhaps the man is serious about turning over a new leaf, he mused, though he'd never openly admit such a softening to Daniel. Through all of this, Lily was the bond that wove them together. As she grew from an infant into a curious toddler, her giggles and babbling words became the glue that sealed cracks during awkward family gatherings. On Lily's first birthday, Rachel decided to hold a small party at the Mitchell estate, inviting only close friends and family. Daniel was nervous about seeing so many people who knew of his betrayal, but he couldn't bear missing another significant milestone in Lily's life. The party was a quiet affair. Balloons, a pink cake, Lily giggling at the flickering candle. Daniel sat next to Rachel, eyes brimming with tears of gratitude when Lily tried to say, "Dada." He noticed Rachel stealing glances at him, her guard still there, but not insurmountable. Thomas offered a curt nod, acknowledging Daniel's presence, but maintaining a reserve that spoke of lingering mistrust. That night, after the guests had left and the estate was peaceful, Daniel lingered. Rachel was in the nursery, rocking Lily to sleep. He stood by the doorway, the soft glow of a nightlight illuminating the scene like a tender painting. An overwhelming surge of emotion gripped him. The memory of what he missed at Lily's birth, the future he almost threw away. When Rachel laid Lily in her crib, Daniel spoke quietly, not wanting to disturb the sleeping child. "Thank you for letting me be here, for not shutting me out completely." She turned arms, folded her gaze uncertain. "I couldn't do that to Lily. She deserves a father who's present." He nodded. "I know, and I'm trying to be that father. I'm also hoping in time, maybe." He trailed off, not daring to finish the sentence. Rachel's expression softened just a fraction. "I see the changes, Daniel. I won't deny it's impressive. But I'm still scared. The pain, it's still there." He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I'll keep showing up, Rach. Every day. I promise." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, exhaling a trembling breath. One day at a time, she repeated. It was a mantra they'd both have to live by, recognizing that the road to redemption is as long as it is winding. Several more months passed, and Daniel's efforts to rebuild trust began showing subtle signs of progress, while Rachel remained guarded, and Thomas kept Daniel's name off any financial documents tied to Lily. Life slowly settled into a tentative rhythm, but then came a jolt. Thomas Mitchell fell seriously ill. It started with chest pains he brushed off until he collapsed during a board meeting. At Cedars-Sinai, doctors discovered severe coronary artery blockages. Surgery was needed, risky at his age. Rachel, devastated, rushed to the hospital, clutching Lily. Despite everything, Daniel joined her, sitting through the long hours of surgery, with a silence born of guilt and shared concern. The operation succeeded, but the prognosis was fragile. Rachel visited daily with Lily, trying to uplift Thomas's spirits. One afternoon, Thomas asked to speak with Daniel alone. Pale but sharp-eyed, Thomas didn't mince words. "You've changed," he said. "Not enough for full trust, but enough that Lily might benefit from having your name on her inheritance papers." Daniel blinked. "I don't expect I'm not reinstating you as trustee," Thomas cut in. "But should anything happen to me, I don't want legal chaos. Lily deserves clarity." The concession shocked Daniel. For months, he'd accepted his exclusion. Yet this having his name acknowledged again meant something deeper than just legal status. "I'm honored," Daniel said quietly. "But only if Rachel agrees." "She will," Thomas replied. "She sees what I see. Just know one slip and your name's off again." In the hallway, Rachel met Daniel's eyes as he explained. She was quiet, then nodded tearfully. "Lily deserves both her parents. If Dad believes you've earned this, I won't object." No reunion was promised, no forgiveness rushed. But in a sterile hospital corridor, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, a door cracked open just enough to let healing in. The legal process to restore Daniel's name to Lily's inheritance moved forward quietly. Rachel added protective clauses Daniel would have no unilateral control. He agreed without hesitation, knowing trust had to be earned, not assumed. Weeks later, the documents were finalized. In Thomas's study, now dim with age and recovery, they held a small signing. Rachel signed first, then passed the pen to Daniel. As his name reappeared in official ink, Daniel felt a rush of humility and responsibility. Afterward, Rachel left to check on Lily, but Thomas motioned for Daniel to stay. "This is for Lily," he said, his voice worn. "But redemption isn't a one-time act. It's daily work. Daniel nodded. Thank you for letting me try. Thomas leaned back, weary but resolute. Daniel stepped out of the room, with a heart heavier not with burden, but with purpose. In the months that followed, Rachel and Daniel co-parented with increasing grace. They weren't a couple, but they functioned as a family defined not by titles, but by presence and intent. Fiona faded into the background, never reaching out again. If she heard of Daniel's efforts, she chose silence. Lily began walking, then talking. Daniel recorded every moment, sharing them with Rachel. Sometimes they laughed together. Sometimes they sat in silence. But the frost between them was thawing slowly, cautiously. One evening they sat in the garden under summer lanterns, Lily asleep inside the air calm. Rachel, holding tea, glanced at Daniel. I can't make promises, she whispered. But I see you trying. Maybe you were always this man, underneath. Daniel reached out gently, taking her hand. She didn't pull away. I'll wait, he said. As long as it takes. They sat in the quiet, no rush, no declarations. Just two people, trying again, not to reclaim the past, but to shape a new kind of future. And so, through heartbreak, betrayal, and the painful lessons that follow, Daniel and Rachel have carved a path forward for themselves and their daughter Lily. The journey toward trust is never easy, and each step reminds them of the fragility of human vows and the devastation that follows a single, selfish choice. Though Daniel's name was once struck from Lily's inheritance, he has regained a cautious footing, both in the legal documents and, more importantly, in the eyes of those he wronged. His redemption remains an ongoing commitment, a promise he must honor daily. Will Daniel and Rachel ever fully reconcile? The answer lies not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, consistent actions that speak to a heart willing to heal and forgive. One thing is certain. Love, when nurtured, can rebuild even the most fractured of families, if given the chance. In the world of the ultra-rich, love is a currency and marriage is a contract. For tech billionaire Julian Croft, that contract was about to be spectacularly breached. He was on top of the world, sitting in New York's most exclusive restaurant, ready to toast a future with his beautiful mistress. He believed he controlled everything: his empire, his narrative, his women. But he forgot one rule of business and of life: never underestimate the woman you've wronged. What you are about to hear is the story of a single dinner, a single toast that ignited a war where the only thing more shocking than the betrayal is the revenge. The air in Celeste, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign tasted of money. It was a low, humming symphony of hushed power deals, the delicate clink of Christophe silver against Bernardeau china, and the subtle, intoxicating scent of truffle oil and vintage Bordeaux. Tonight, Julian Croft, the tech world's golden shark, was the symphony's conductor. At 42, Julian possessed the kind of predatory grace that came from a decade of hostile takeovers and market disruptions. His company, Ethereum Dynamics, had revolutionized data security, making him a billionaire before his 35th birthday. He had a jawline that seemed carved from granite eyes the color of a stormy sea, and a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than the waiter's car. Everything about him was a testament to his own relentless, brutal ambition. Across the table, bathed in the soft, flattering glow of the Murano glass chandelier, sat Isabella Rossi. She was 28, an art curator, whose ambition was a perfect fiery match for his own. Her beauty was a weapon, cascading raven hair, lips the color of a blood ruby, and a mind that was sharp, cynical, and utterly captivated by the power Julian wielded. She wore a slinky, emerald green dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, vibrant jewel against the restaurant's muted palette of cream and gold. "You're staring," Isabella murmured, a playful smile gracing her lips as she swirled the deep red liquid in her glass. It was a 1998 Petrus, a wine Julian had ordered with a casual flick of his wrist. "I'm admiring my future," Julian replied, his voice a low, possessive rumble. He reached across the table, his fingers tracing the delicate bones of her hand. "This is where you belong, Izzy. Not in some stuffy gallery, but here, with me." Isabella's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's a beautiful thought, Julian, but thoughts don't keep you warm at night. Contracts do. Promises do." She let her thumb brush against his, a silent, demanding caress. "She's still there, in our house." The she was Eleanor Croft née Vance. If Julian was the brutal, disruptive force of new money, Eleanor was the serene, unshakable fortress of old money. Her family, the Vances, had been shaping New York's financial and cultural landscape since the days of the Rockefellers. Their wealth was quiet, vast, and woven into the very fabric of the city. Their marriage 5 years ago had been the ultimate merger, his disruptive genius, her family's unimpeachable legacy. To the world, they were a power couple. To Julian, the marriage had become a gilded cage. Eleanor was grace, poise, and predictability. She ran their 3 homes with terrifying efficiency, chaired the city's most important charities, and understood the nuances of a hostile board meeting as well as he did. But her passion, he felt, was as cool and curated as the museum wings her family endowed. "Eleanor understands the arrangement," Julian said, a dismissive wave of his hand. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Eleanor understood arrangements, yes, but she believed their marriage was a sacred one. "Does she understand that you love me?" Isabella pressed her dark eyes, searching his. "Does she understand that you're going to leave her?" This was their nightly ritual, the delicate, dangerous dance of reassurance. He had been promising to leave Eleanor for a year, ever since this affair had ignited from a spark of mutual ambition into a consuming fire. "The timing has to be perfect," he said, the same excuse he always used. "Ethereum is about to close the Helios merger." Her father Arthur sits on the board of the target company. I can't risk him torpedoing the deal of a lifetime for a domestic squabble. A domestic squabble. Isabella's voice was laced with ice. She pulled her hand away. "Is that what I am to you, Julian?" A squabble. He saw the flicker of doubt, the threat of her pulling away, and he moved to extinguish it instantly. He was a master of control. "No," he said, his voice softening, becoming hypnotic. "You are the deal of a lifetime. You're the only thing that feels real in my life." He signaled to the sommelier, who approached their table with a bottle of Dom Perignon Rosé, chilled to crystalline perfection. "What's this for?" Isabella asked, her mood shifting, as the man popped the cork with a gentle, expensive sigh. "For us," Julian declared, his eyes locked on hers as the shimmering pink liquid filled their flutes. "For the future." He raised his glass. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. For a moment, it was just the two of them, suspended in a bubble of champagne and illicit promises. "Isabella." He began, his voice resonating with a theatrical sincerity that had swayed boardrooms and investors for years. "I want to make a toast." He stood up, a move of such brazen arrogance that a few nearby diners, recognizing him from the cover of Forbes, paused their conversations to watch. To a new beginning, Julian proclaimed, his voice loud enough to carry. To a life of passion, not just obligation. To the woman who has shown me what true happiness is. To the future Mrs. Croft. He looked directly at Isabella, a triumphant smirk on his face. To you, Izzy. Isabella's breath hitched. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of shock and victory. This was it, a public declaration. There was no going back. She raised her glass to meet his, and then a sound. It was not a loud sound, but it cut through the room with the sharp, clean precision of a diamond slicing through glass. Click-clack, click-clack. The sound of a woman's heels on the polished marble floor of the foyer. It was a steady, unhurried rhythm, a rhythm of purpose. The conversations that had paused to watch Julian's toast did not resume. Instead, a new, deeper silence fell. Heads turned not with casual curiosity, but with a sudden electric tension. The air crackled. Julian's smile froze on his face. He knew that sound. It was the sound of his wife's Manolo Blahniks, a sound he usually associated with charity galas and board meetings, a sound that had absolutely no place here in the inner sanctum of his betrayal. He turned slowly, his heart a cold stone in his chest, and there she was. Eleanor Croft stood in the archway that separated the main dining room from the foyer. She was not crying. She was not hysterical. She was a portrait of lethal serenity. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress from a designer so exclusive it had no logo. It was designed to accommodate the gentle, unmistakable swell of her pregnancy, a pregnancy Julian had announced with her, with performative pride, at a press conference just 2 months ago. Her blonde hair was swept back in a classic chignon, and the famous Vance sapphires, a cold, deep blue, glittered at her ears and throat. They matched the ice in her eyes. Her gaze swept past the curious onlookers, past the horrified maitre d', and settled on the scene at Julian's table. She took in the champagne, the intimate proximity of their hands just moments before, the victorious gleam in Isabella's eyes, and the damning toast still hanging in the air. Her expression did not change, but a universe of understanding and judgment passed through her eyes. Julian felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. The hunter had just become the prey. He saw it all in an instant. The public humiliation, the scandal, the inevitable, catastrophic call to her father. Isabella, for her part, straightened her spine. The initial shock gave way to a surge of defiance. Good, she thought. Let's have it out. Let the war begin tonight. She placed her hand possessively on Julian's arm, staking her claim. Julian, seeing the move, wanted to flinch away, but was paralyzed. Eleanor took a single deliberate step into the room. Then another. Her pace never faltered as she walked the long, silent path toward their table. The only sound was the steady, ominous click-clack of her heels on the marble. It sounded like a countdown. She stopped not beside Julian, but at the head of the table, a position of power. Her eyes did not even flicker toward Isabella. She addressed her husband, her voice perfectly modulated, yet carrying the chilling weight of a death sentence. "Julian," she said, and the name was an indictment. What a surprise. I didn't realize Ethereum was celebrating the Helios merger so publicly. Or is this a different kind of merger you're toasting? Julian finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic thing. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? You should be at home resting." A ghost of a smile, cold and devoid of all warmth, touched Eleanor's lips. My doctor recommended a short walk, and I had a meeting nearby. She paused, letting the lie hang in the air, a lie so blatant it was an insult. But I must say, Julian, your choice of toast is revealing. The future Mrs. Croft. Her eyes finally dismissively flicked to Isabella. I hope you got her a prenup. The first one can be so terribly messy to untangle. Isabella bristled, opening her mouth to speak, but Julian shot her a silencing look. Eleanor, this is not the time or the place. On the contrary, Eleanor replied, her voice dropping to an intimate, terrifying whisper that only they could hear, while the rest of the room watched the silent, brutal pantomime. I think this is the perfect time and place. A public declaration deserves a public response, don't you think? She then did something no one expected. She reached into her impossibly small, elegant clutch and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. She didn't unfold it. She simply placed it on the crisp, white tablecloth next to Julian's plate. I was going to have this messengered to your office tomorrow morning, but since you're here celebrating your new beginnings, I thought I could save on the courier fee. Her gaze was unwavering. It's a preliminary injunction, Julian, filed an hour ago. My father's legal team is remarkably efficient. Julian stared at the paper as if it were a viper. An injunction against what? His assets. The company. Eleanor seemed to read his mind. It freezes your personal accounts, all of them. The St. Regis suite you've been keeping for Miss Rossi here, it's under your personal Amex Centurion card. That card was declined about 30 minutes ago. I imagine her things are being packed by hotel security as we speak. Isabella's face went white. The victory of moments ago curdled into pure, unadulterated panic. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide with disbelief and accusation. He had told her everything was secure, that he was in control. And the donation. Eleanor continued, her voice relentlessly calm, the one you made from an Ethereum marketing account to the Rossi Contemporary Art Fund. The one that paid for her gallery's new exhibit. My father found that particularly interesting. Apparently the board has some questions about off-book expenditures. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a scorned wife's emotional outburst. This was a coordinated attack. This was a tactical strike, executed with the cold, brutal precision of a Vance. He had been outmaneuvered. He, Julian Croft, had been played. Eleanor looked from his ashen face to Isabella's panicked one. She gave a small, almost pitying sigh. You see, Julian, she said, her voice a final, devastating blow. You toast to the future, but you seem to have forgotten. My family, we don't just invest in the future. We own it. She turned her back straight, her head held high, and without another word, she walked away. The click-clack of her heels was no longer a countdown. It was the sound of a gavel falling, the sound of judgment rendered. The silence she left in her wake was absolute, broken only by the fizzing of the now unwanted champagne in Julian Croft's glass. He was no longer the conductor of the symphony. He was just a man in a very expensive suit, in a very expensive restaurant, who had just discovered that the gilded cage he resented was the only thing that had been holding him up. And his wife, his pregnant, unassuming wife, had just walked away with the key. For a full minute after Eleanor's departure, the scene at the table was a frozen tableau. Julian stood, his hand still holding the champagne flute. The toast turned to ash in his mouth. Isabella sat rigid. The defiant posture she'd adopted now crumbled, revealing the terrified young woman beneath the veneer of a seductress. The curious eyes of New York's elite were on them no longer with awe, but with the ravenous appetite of sharks sensing blood in the water. The low hum of the restaurant had returned, but it was different now, charged with gossip speculation and the sweet, irresistible schadenfreude of the wealthy watching one of their own begin to fall. Julian was the first to move. He slammed his glass down, the pink champagne sloshing over the rim onto the pristine tablecloth, a stain spreading like his public disgrace. "Get up," he snarled at Isabella, his voice a harsh, guttural whisper. "My things, at the St. Regis," she stammered, her mind racing. Her clothes, her laptop documents, her entire curated life was in that suite. "Forget them," Julian snapped, throwing a black American Express card on the table without even looking at the bill. "We're leaving. Now." He strode towards the exit, not with the confident swagger of his entrance, but with the hurried, head-down pace of a defeated general retreating from the battlefield. Isabella, grabbing her clutch, scurried behind him, the emerald dress that had felt so powerful an hour ago now feeling like a gaudy costume. The walk of shame through the dining room was an agony of averted gazes and poorly concealed whispers. The moment they were outside in the cool night air, the facade of unity shattered. "What the hell was that?" Julian Isabella's voice was sharp, accusatory. "You said you had it under control. You said she didn't know anything." "An injunction, my gallery." Julian rounded on her, his face a mask of incandescent fury. "You think I planned this? You and your constant pushing. When, Julian, when? You wanted a public declaration. Well, you got one. How does it feel me? You were the one who stood up and made that idiotic toast." She shot back, tears of rage and fear welling in her eyes. "You were showing off. And now my name, my gallery is going to be dragged into your sordid divorce. My sordid divorce." He let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Oh, it's going to be so much more than that, sweetheart." You heard her. This isn't about the affair. This is about Ethereum. This is about her father. The name hung in the air between them, Arthur Vance. A titan of industry, a man who moved markets with a single phone call and whose reputation for ruthless, quiet competence was legendary. Julian had always seen him as a relic, a dinosaur of the old world. Now he felt the weight of that dinosaur's foot on his neck. His phone buzzed. It was his CFO, Mark Renshaw. He ignored it. It buzzed again. His chief legal counsel, Anya Sharma. He ignored that, too. He knew what they were calling about. They would have received alerts the second the injunction hit. The gears of war were already turning. "Get a taxi," he ordered Isabella, his mind already spinning, calculating, trying to find a counter-move in a game that had been rigged against him. "Go to a hotel. The Mandarin, the Plaza. I don't care. Use your own name. Don't call me. Don't call you." Isabella's voice rose in disbelief. "Julian, you can't just cut at me loose. I'm not cutting you loose." He lied, his voice strained with impatience. "I'm containing the situation. I need to think. I need to call my lawyers. Now go." He turned his back on her and started walking, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over Anya's name. He had to get ahead of this. He had to fight back. But as he looked up at the glittering, indifferent skyline of Manhattan, a cold dread seeped into his bones. Eleanor hadn't just thrown a rock into his life. She had detonated a bomb at its very foundation. Meanwhile, Eleanor Croft did not go home to rest. The moment her black town car pulled away from Celeste, The mask of icy composure dissolved not into tears, but into a look of profound, weary determination. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to recede, leaving behind the deep, aching throb of betrayal. The baby inside her gave a gentle kick, a small, innocent reminder of what was truly at stake. She placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise. To the offices of Vance Holdings' driver, she said, her voice clear and firm. 20 minutes later, she was stepping out of an elevator into the hushed, opulent world of the 70th floor of One Vanderbilt. Unlike the flashy open-plan chaos of Ethereum dynamics, the Vance Holdings offices were a sanctuary of dark wood, old leather, and priceless art. It smelled of power that was inherited, not seized. Arthur Vance was waiting for her in his corner office, the panoramic view of the city, a sparkling tapestry behind him. He was a man in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that held the same cool blue intelligence as his daughter's. He wasn't pacing. He was sitting calmly in a leather armchair, a tumbler of Macallan 25 in his hand. He rose as she entered, his stern face softening with paternal concern. He walked over and embraced her, his hand gently patting her back. "It's done," Eleanor said, her voice muffled against his suit jacket. "I know. I've already had 3 calls," he replied, his tone grim. One from a board member at Helios, asking if the merger is still viable. Another from a journalist at the Journal sniffing for a story, and a third from Julian's lawyer, Anya Sharma, asking for a ceasefire. He led her to the armchair opposite his. Did he crumble? Eleanor sank into the soft leather, a wave of exhaustion washing over her, like a cheap suit in the rain. But Arthur, seeing him with her, it was everything I imagined, and worse. "I know, my dear. I know." He let her have the moment, the space to feel the personal pain before they addressed the business. He had never liked Julian Croft. He'd seen the rapacious hunger in the young man's eyes from the start. But he had trusted Eleanor's judgment, a mistake he had been quietly preparing to rectify for over a year. "The PI was discreet?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. Mr. Donovan was at a table in the corner posing as a tourist. He has an audio recording of the toast, and high-resolution photos of the entire evening. Arthur's lips thinned into a grim line. "Good. We'll need it all." He took a sip of his scotch. The injunction was just the first shot across the bow, Eleanor. A distraction. It freezes his personal liquidity, makes his life difficult, puts the Mistress in a panic. But the real fight is for Ethereum. Eleanor looked up, her eyes clear and focused once more. The wounded wife was gone, replaced by the Vance heiress. What's the next move, the board? Arthur said simply. Julian's power is absolute only so long as the board believes he is infallible. His personal life has just become a massive liability. In the world of multi-billion-dollar mergers, optics are everything. The Helios board will be spooked. Our own board members at Ethereum, the ones loyal to us, are already drafting a letter calling for an emergency session to discuss a crisis of leadership. "He'll fight it," Eleanor stated. "He'll paint me as a vengeful, hysterical wife. He'll use the pregnancy, say I'm not thinking clearly." "Let him," Arthur said, a predatory glint in his eye. "He'll underestimate you. He always has. That's his weakness. But this isn't just about his infidelity anymore. That's the pretext. The real leverage is the money." He gestured to a thick, leather-bound folder on his desk. Donovan's team didn't just follow Julian to restaurants. They followed the money. The donation to the Rossi Gallery was sloppy, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. We've found a series of shell corporations, small untraceable payments authorized by him, funneled out of Ethereum's R&D budgets and into accounts that, well, they certainly aren't funding data security research. A cold realization dawned on Eleanor. He's embezzling. It's more sophisticated than that, Arthur corrected. He's using company funds to seed a new private venture. A personal project he's been building in the shadows, ready to launch after the Helios merger, gave him an unassailable position. He planned to use Ethereum's resources to build his next empire, one that was entirely his own, with no Vance connection. The audacity of it, the sheer calculated betrayal, was breathtaking. He hadn't just been cheating on her in their bed. He'd been cheating on her in the boardroom, using her family's legacy and investment as a launch pad for his own secret ambitions. And the Mistress, Eleanor asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Is she involved in this? Arthur allowed himself a small, cold smile. This was the part of the plan that was as vicious as it was brilliant. That, he said, is the most interesting part. The primary shell corporation, the one receiving the largest payments, is a company registered in the Cayman Islands. It's called IR Holdings. The sole director is listed as Isabella Rossi. Eleanor stared at her father, the full diabolical scope of Julian's plan and her father's counterplan becoming clear. Isabella wasn't just a mistress. Julian had made her a co-conspirator. He had woven her into his financial treason, likely without her even understanding the full implications, thinking she was just signing papers for a future investment. He had made her a tool, and in doing so he had handed the Vances a weapon. She's his liability, Eleanor breathed. She's his ruin, Arthur corrected. Julian can try to paint you as the scorned wife, but when the board sees evidence that he has funneled millions of dollars of shareholder money into a shell company run by his mistress, an art curator with zero tech experience, his credibility will be incinerated. They won't see a domestic squabble. They will see fraud. They will see a man so reckless, so arrogant, that he put the entire company at risk for his affair. Eleanor stood up and walked to the vast window, looking down at the city lights. A city her family had helped build. A city Julian had tried to conquer. He had seen her as a beautiful passive asset, a bridge to the old world he needed to legitimize himself. He had never for one moment seen her as an adversary. So we don't just divorce him, she said, her reflection a determined silhouette against the skyline. We don't just take our money back. We take the company. Ethereum was built on a foundation of Vance capital and connections, Arthur said, joining her at the window. We are simply reclaiming our investment. The board will need a steady hand to guide them through the Helios merger after Julian is gone. Someone who represents stability. Someone with the name Vance. He put his hand on her shoulder. They will need you, Eleanor. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. To step out from behind the shadow of her husband and her father. To take the reins of the very company that was meant to be his crowning achievement. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Eleanor smiled a true, genuine smile. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. Her legacy. And the legacy of the child she was carrying. Julian thought he was toasting his future. But all he had done was secure his place in the past. The war had begun, but in the quiet, wood-paneled office high above the city, it was already won. All that was left was the execution. The 3 days following the detonation at Celeste were a masterclass in corporate warfare fought not with armies, but with whispered phone calls, clandestine meetings, and the precise surgical deployment of information. Julian Croft, for the first time in his professional life, was on the defensive, and he was hemorrhaging support at an alarming rate. He had barricaded himself in his office at Ethereum's gleaming headquarters, a glass and steel monument to his own ego. He was a silent lion, pacing, shouting into his phone, and trying to shore up a dam that was cracking in a dozen places at once. The preliminary injunction was a constant, humiliating nuisance. Every transaction he tried to make was a struggle. But the real damage was to his reputation. The story of the toast at Celeste had ripped through New York's financial circles like a virus. It wasn't the affair that shocked people. Infidelity was practically a sport in their world. It was the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the public display and the immediate, brutal retaliation from the Vances. It painted Julian not as a powerful player, but as a reckless fool who had misjudged his opponent. His calls to board members were met with cool, non-committal responses. His attempts to reach Arthur Vance were stonewalled. His legal team, led by the formidable Anya Sharma, was flying blind, trying to fight an enemy they couldn't see, one who had already anticipated their every move. Isabella was a ghost. After their fight, she had checked into the Mandarin Oriental under a false name, her panic escalating with every unanswered text to Julian. He was ignoring her, treating her like a liability to be managed, not the queen he had promised to crown. Her gallery was in chaos, with donors calling, spooked by the rumors. Her dream, which had seemed so tangible, was rapidly dissolving into a nightmare. She was isolated and terrified. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday morning. The stated purpose on the agenda was vague: to address a crisis of leadership and review executive fiduciary conduct. Julian knew exactly what it meant. It was a coup. He prepared for it like a general preparing for a final, desperate battle. He and Anya worked around the clock, drafting statements, preparing defenses. He would paint this as a personal vendetta, a family matter spilling into the boardroom. He would portray Eleanor as emotionally unstable, her actions driven by hormones and jealousy. It was a disgusting, misogynistic strategy, but it was all he had. He would remind the board of his genius, of the billions in value he had created. He would bully and charm them into submission, as he had always done. Friday morning arrived grey and menacing. The Ethereum boardroom was on the top floor, a sterile, intimidating space dominated by a colossal black granite table. The mood was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The board members, a collection of grizzled industry veterans and venture capitalists, avoided his gaze as they took their seats. They knew a bloodletting was coming. Julian took his place at the head of the table, projecting an aura of calm, defiant control. Arthur Vance sat opposite him, his face an unreadable patrician mask. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice smooth and commanding. "I know why we're here. My father-in-law has decided to air my family's private laundry in a professional setting. It's regrettable, it's unprofessional, and frankly, it's beneath the dignity of this company." He was about to launch into his prepared speech about Eleanor's delicate condition when the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Eleanor Croft walked in. She was not dressed for a charity luncheon. She wore a slate-grey power suit that was expertly tailored to her maternal form. Her hair pulled back, her face composed and resolute. She carried a leather portfolio. She wasn't the vengeful wife from the gossip columns. She was a shareholder representative. She took a seat next to her father, directly in Julian's line of sight. Eleanor Julian said, his voice tight with fury. "This is a closed board meeting." "I'm aware," she replied, her voice steady and clear, echoing in the silent room. "I am here today, representing the Vance family's 18% stake in Ethereum Dynamics. My father has granted me his proxy. I have a right to be here." The move was a masterstroke. It reframed her presence instantly. She was not a victim. She was a power player. Arthur Vance spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative. "Julian, we are here because the board has received credible information that raises serious questions about your judgment and your management of company assets. This is not a family matter. This is a shareholder matter." What credible information? Julian scoffed, though a knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. Vague accusations. Rumors started by a disgruntled wife. "Not accusations, Julian," Eleanor said, opening her portfolio on the table. "Evidence." She slid a document across the polished granite surface towards the lead independent director, a man named Henderson. "This is a sworn affidavit from a Mr. Charles Donovan, a licensed private investigator. It contains a full transcript and audio recording of your toast at Celeste, in which you designated Miss Isabella Rossi, the future Mrs. Croft, a woman who is not your wife." A murmur went through the room. It was one thing to hear a rumor, another to know it was recorded. "And this," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, "is a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for a shell company in the Cayman Islands called IR Holdings. As you can see, the sole director is Miss Isabella Rossi." She slid another document across the table. "And this is a detailed financial summary prepared by forensic accountants from Deloitte, tracing a series of payments over the last 8 months. A total of $14.7 million transferred from Ethereum's research and development cost centers directly into the accounts of IR Holdings. Payments that you personally authorized, Julian." Silence. A deep, profound, tomb-like silence. Julian's face had gone completely pale. The blood roared in his ears. This was it. The ambush. He had walked right into it. He looked from the damning papers to Eleanor's implacable face. He had seen her as wallpaper in his life, and she had been building a guillotine behind it. Henderson, the lead director, looked up from the papers, his face grim. "Julian, is this true? Did you divert nearly $15 million of shareholder money into a private company run by your mistress?" Julian's mind raced, searching for a lie, an explanation, anything. It was a seed investment, a stealth project for a new AI art authentication platform. It would have created huge value for Ethereum down the line. His explanation sounded weak, pathetic, even to his own ears. And then the final devastating twist, the one that proved the Vances weren't just trying to wound him, they were determined to annihilate him. "An interesting theory," Julian Eleanor said, "that Miss Rossi, an art curator, was your secret partner in a high-tech venture. We thought the board might want to ask her about that directly." She nodded towards the boardroom door. Anya Sharma, Julian's own lawyer, opened it, and walked in Isabella Rossi. If Julian was pale, Isabella was translucent. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face a mask of terror and betrayal. She was flanked by a stern-looking man in a suit, her own lawyer. Julian stared at her, then at Anya. "Anya, what is the meaning of this?" he roared, feeling the last vestiges of his control snap. "You're my lawyer, and as your lawyer, my duty is to advise you on mitigating catastrophic risk." Anya said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Vance and Mrs. Croft approached Miss Rossi 2 days ago. They made her an offer, full immunity from any potential fraud charges, plus a legal fund to protect her gallery in exchange for her full cooperation. Betrayal. Absolute betrayal from every corner. They showed her the incorporation documents, Julian Anya continued. They explained what a shell corporation is. They explained what embezzlement is. They explained her own personal legal exposure. Faced with the choice between loyalty to you and a potential 5 to 10-year prison sentence, Miss Rossi made a very rational decision. Isabella wouldn't look at him. She looked at Eleanor, who gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Henderson turned to Isabella. "Miss Rossi, were you aware that the funds being transferred into IR Holdings were coming from Ethereum Dynamics' R&D budget?" Isabella took a shaky breath. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Julian told me it was his own money. He said it was an investment vehicle he was setting up for our future. He had me sign papers. I didn't understand what they were. I trusted him." The words, a pathetic mix of truth and self-preservation, were the final nails in Julian's coffin. He had been cast as the villain, the master manipulator. She was the ingenue, the pawn he had exploited. He had given her power over him, and his enemies had turned it into a weapon. The love he had professed, the future he had toasted it, had all been transactional. And in the end, she had made a better transaction with his wife. Julian Croft looked around the table. He saw no allies. He saw no support. He saw only the cold, hard calculus of business in the eyes of the men and women looking back at him. They weren't looking at a genius anymore. They were looking at a liability that needed to be cut loose before it sank the entire ship. He had been so focused on conquering the world that he had never bothered to secure his own kingdom. He had dismissed his wife, used his mistress, and underestimated his father-in-law. And in one brutal, perfectly executed maneuver, they had taken it all away. Arthur Vance's voice cut through the silence, calm and final. "I believe we have a motion on the floor," he said, looking at Henderson. "A motion to remove Julian Croft as CEO and chairman of the board of Ethereum Dynamics, effective immediately pending a full internal and federal investigation." Julian didn't even stay to hear the vote. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't look at Eleanor or Isabella. He looked at nothing. With the last shred of his dignity, he walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind his company, his legacy, and his future. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him out of the world he had built. The siege was over. Of course, here is a rewritten, expanded version of the final chapter, adding more depth, detail, and emotional resonance to the aftermath. The boardroom door clicked shut behind Julian Croft, the sound as final and absolute as a coffin lid being sealed. The silence that followed in the hallway was more deafening than the accusations he'd left behind. For a moment he just stood there, suspended in a state of pure shock, his mind a white-hot static hum. He was Julian Croft. Men like him didn't lose. They didn't get outmaneuvered. They didn't get erased. He walked stiff-legged and robotic towards the private elevator that responded only to his fingerprint. He pressed his thumb against the sensor. Access denied. A cold fury, sharp and clarifying, sliced through the fog. He tried again. Access denied. They were already cutting him out, severing the digital tethers of his identity with cold, swift efficiency. He was forced to turn and walk towards the public elevator bank, his footsteps echoing in what was an hour ago his kingdom. As he waited, a junior analyst, a kid he wouldn't have recognized, stepped out of a nearby office, saw him, and his eyes widened in a mixture of awe and pity before he quickly looked away. The word was already out. The king was dead. His first destination was not a home, he had none left, but the sterile sanctuary of the Fiduciary Trust Bank of New York, where his personal fortune was managed. The power of Ethereum might be gone, but his billions were his own. He would liquidate. He would scorch the earth. He would build something new and crush them all. The rage was a fuel propelling him through the revolving doors into the bank's hushed marble lobby. He didn't wait in line. He strode directly to the private banking office of his longtime manager, a man named Sterling. Sterling, usually obsequious and eager to please, met him with a face full of professional sorrow. "Julian, I was just about to call you," he began, wringing his hands. "Don't bother, Julian," cut him off. His voice raw. "I want to initiate a transfer. 500 million to an offshore account, now." Sterling paled. He cleared his throat and avoided Julian's gaze, looking at a file on his desk. "Julian, I can't do that. We received a notice from the SEC an hour ago, and a federal court order. It's tied to the injunction from your wife's legal team, but it's broader now." "What are you talking about?" Julian snarled. "This is my personal wealth. It has nothing to do with Ethereum. The notice alleges that a significant portion of your personal seed money, the capital you used to launch Ethereum, was entangled with early Vance family investments," Sterling said, practically whispering the words. "And given the new allegations of financial misconduct at the corporate level, all assets, corporate and personal, linked to the Croft and Vance names are effectively frozen, pending a full forensic review." "I'm sorry, Julian. My hands are tied." Julian stared at him. The rage inside him didn't explode. It imploded, leaving a black hole in its place. It was the ultimate checkmate. The Vances hadn't just invested in his company. They had underwritten his life. And now they were calling in the debt. He wasn't just fired. He was bankrupt. He was a man with a 10-figure net worth on paper and not a dollar he could actually touch. He turned and walked out of the bank, not a caged lion anymore, but a ghost invisible to the world of wealth he had once commanded. His final confrontation with Isabella happened 2 weeks later, not by chance, but by design. He had to see the wreckage up close. He found her at her gallery, the Rossi Contemporary. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and it was empty. The vibrant, edgy art on the walls seemed to mock the funereal silence of the space. A small, discreet sign on the door read "For Lease." She was packing canvases into a crate, her movements listless. The emerald dress was gone, replaced by jeans and a faded sweater. The fiery ambition in her eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind the dull ash of defeat. "Hello, Izzy," he said from the doorway. She jumped, a small cry escaping her lips. When she saw him, her face hardened. "What do you want, Julian?" "A post-mortem," he said, walking slowly into the space. He gestured at the empty room. "Looks like the IR Holdings venture didn't pan out." "Don't you dare," she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage born of humiliation. "You did this. You built this fantasy and you dragged me into it. You lied to me. It wasn't our future. It was your escape hatch, and you made me the unwitting accomplice. And when my wife and her father offered you a better deal, you took it." He stated, his voice devoid of accusation, a mere statement of fact. "You signed their affidavit. You sat in that boardroom and you stuck the knife in. They showed me prison sentences, Julian. She cried, throwing down a roll of bubble wrap. They showed me my name on financial documents I didn't understand, for crimes I didn't know I was committing. You used my name, my signature, to steal from your own company. Did you think I would go to jail for you? For a man who was ignoring my calls. The second things got difficult. For a man who abandoned me outside a restaurant. He had no answer for that, because she was right. He had seen her as an accessory, a beautiful component of his new life. He had never considered her a partner. He had never considered her at all. She won. You know, Isabella said, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. Your wife. She got everything. The company, the money. She even paid the remaining lease on this gallery. A charitable donation from the New Ethereum Foundation. It was her final move. To own the very ground my dream died on. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to salt the earth. Julian looked around at the barren white walls. He felt a sudden strange pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but a shared sense of ruin. They were two sides of the same counterfeit coin he had tried to mint. Both of them had been dazzled by the same promise of a glorious future, and both were left with nothing. Goodbye, Isabella, he said, and walked away, the scent of dust and failure clinging to him. 6 months passed. The seasons turned indifferent to human drama. Julian's life shrank. The legal battles ended not with a bang, but a whimper. A settlement was reached. To avoid prosecution, he relinquished all claims to any Ethereum stock and all contested assets. The SEC levied a historic fine that consumed the last of his untangled personal wealth. He was left with a fraction of his former fortune, enough to live on, but not enough to ever matter again. He now lived in a one-bedroom rental in Long Island City, a place chosen for its sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline he could no longer touch. The ghost of his former life taunted him daily from across the river. He learned the rhythms of a normal life, the screech of the 7 train, the price of milk, the anonymity of being just another face in the crowd. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by jeans and unremarkable sweaters. Julian Croft, the Titan, was gone. In his place was just Julian, a man haunted by what-ifs. One raw March afternoon, he was sitting in a small coffee shop, nursing a single cup for over an hour, scrolling through the news on a second-hand laptop. And then he saw it. An article in the Wall Street Journal's business section. The headline was a gut-punch phoenix from the ashes. How Eleanor Vance Croft resurrected Ethereum and redefined tech leadership. He clicked on it with a morbid, self-punishing curiosity. The article was effusive, detailing how she had not only salvaged the Helios merger, but had renegotiated it on terms far more favorable to Ethereum. It spoke of her calm, ethical leadership, her focus on sustainable growth over reckless disruption. She had purged the company of his cronies and replaced them with a team loyal to her vision. She was being hailed as a new icon, a different kind of visionary. And then there was the picture. It was taken at a press conference. Eleanor stood at a podium, looking powerful and serene. The cool Vance poise was still there, but it was warmed by a new, softer confidence. In her arms, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, she held their son for the world to see. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He zoomed in on the image. The baby had a full head of dark hair like his. The caption underneath delivered the final crushing blow: Eleanor Vance Croft with her son Arthur Vance Croft. Arthur. Vance. Croft. They had kept his name, but only as a subordinate clause, an afterthought appended to the two names that had defeated him. The boy was a Vance, first a symbol of her family's triumph. He was a legacy Julian could see but never claim. He stared at the picture of the child he would never hold, the son who would be raised to see his own father, as a cautionary tale. A profound, hollow ache spread through his chest, a grief for a life that was his, and that he had carelessly, arrogantly thrown away. Across the river into the top-floor office that was once his Eleanor Vance Croft ended a conference call with the Tokyo board. She swiveled in her chair and looked out at the same skyline Julian saw, but from the pinnacle, not the exile. Her life was a whirlwind of board meetings, market analyses, and strategy sessions, but it was punctuated by sacred, quiet moments. Her son Arthur was asleep in a bassinet in a small private annex to her office. Her father had been skeptical of the arrangement at first, but Eleanor had been firm. She would not sacrifice her role as a mother for her role as a CEO. She would redefine the job to encompass both. She walked over and looked down at her sleeping son. He was the reason. He was the answer to every why. When she had discovered the full extent of Julian's financial treason, her first instinct had been to simply divorce him, to take her money and run. But then she had felt the first kick inside her. It was a flutter, a tiny spark of life that ignited a fire in her. This was no longer just about her. It was about her child's legacy, about protecting his birthright from the man who was willing to gamble it all away. Her father Arthur entered without knocking, a rare smile on his face. "Helios signed," he said simply. "The deal is done. Your terms." "Our terms, Dad," she corrected, smiling back. Their relationship had changed. He no longer saw her as the daughter to be protected, but as the successor he had always hoped for, the one who had finally emerged from the crucible. "You've done well, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with pride. He looked at the sleeping baby. "You've secured his future." "I've secured our future," she said, placing a hand on the bassinet. Later that evening, after the city had lit up like a field of scattered diamonds, Eleanor stood by the vast window holding her son. She thought back to that night at Celeste, to the icy calm that had descended upon her as she walked toward that table. She had gone there expecting to be hurt, but she had not expected to find her purpose. Julian had toasted a fantasy, a shallow future built on lies. She had responded by seizing the truth, a tangible future built on strength, legacy, and the unshakable power of a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. He had wanted a new life without her, and in the end that was the one thing she had given him. He was free of his gilded cage, while she had taken the gold and forged it into a crown. In the end, Julian Croft's grand toast celebrated a future that never was. He learned the hardest lesson the world of power has to teach, that true strength isn't about loud declarations, but quiet resolve. Eleanor Croft didn't just walk away from a failed marriage. She walked into her own destiny, proving that the most effective revenge is to build a better life, a stronger apple on the rubble of betrayal.